You type Tonga cliff mystery into Google and this pops up. A rock. Yep, just a rock. At least at first glance. But it gets weird once you realize this is actually a 2-story tall boulder perched on top of a 120-foot high cliff in Tonga. And it's chilling there, at a whopping 128 feet above sea level. So, how the heck did this rock get there? First, a proper introduction. This is Makalahi, which means big rock in Tongan. This name hits the nail on the head because this baby stands at about 22 feet tall. That's taller than a giraffe standing on its tiptoes. And it weighs over 1,300 tons. And that's like stacking nearly 325 elephants on a giant scale. With those massive measurements, it makes total sense that the locals call it Makalahi. But from now on, we can also think of it as the giant Tsunami rock. And to understand why, I've got to tell you the story of Makalahi in Tonga. In 2024, researchers from the University of Queensland's School of the Environment were exploring the southern side of Tongatapu Island. One day, they were chatting with a group of local farmers who mentioned a strange and massive rock sitting up on a cliff. And they were honestly pretty surprised. After all, it didn't make any sense for such a huge boulder to be located that far inland, especially since it's sitting about 656 feet away from the edge of the cliff. On top of that, it was covered in vegetation and surrounded by overgrowth, which suggests it's been sitting there for a long, long time. That's when they started asking themselves the big question: where did this rock even come from? So to figure it out, the team created a 3-dimensional model of the boulder and headed to the coast. After some careful research, they finally found the spot where the boulder could have originated. Turns out, it broke off from a cliff more than 90 feet above sea level. Alright, so they found the source, but let's take a moment to recap what we know so far. The rock originally came from a spot about 98 feet above sea level, and now it's sitting at 128 feet above sea level. That's a pretty big jump. Sure, it's not like climbing Mount Everest or anything, but come on, it's a rock. It didn't just grab some gear and climb up there by itself. That brings us back to the big question. How did this massive boulder get up there? Well, it was probably moved by a tsunami. Yep, this rock could actually be solid ancient evidence of a tsunami. You see, we're talking about Tonga, an island country in Polynesia, part of Oceania. It's made up of nearly 170 islands with about 36 of them inhabited. The country is divided into 3 main island groups: the Vava'u, Ha'api, and Tongatapu archipelagos. The entire region sits right at the junction of 2 major tectonic plates, the Indo-Australian plate to the west and the Pacific plate to the east. It's part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, that giant horseshoe-shaped zone that wraps around the ocean basin. And if there's one thing we know about the Ring of Fire, is that it's packed with intense geological activity. With lots of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happening all the time, and those events can absolutely trigger catastrophic tsunamis. Tonga is no exception. According to Dr. Annie Lau, a coastal geomorphologist who took part in the study, Tonga has a long history of tsunamis for exactly that reason. Take the tsunami that hit the country at the beginning of 2022, for example. That catastrophic event produced waves as high as 66 feet, with water pushing nearly 0.62 miles inland. It was so powerful that, tragically, it claimed the lives of at least 6 people, and it was actually triggered by a volcanic eruption. So yeah, tsunamis are pretty common in Tonga, thanks to all that magma and tectonic activity constantly happening beneath the surface. And a massive, powerful wave is likely what carried Makalahi up onto the cliff. According to the study, this event may have happened around 7,000 years ago. That's even older than the first human settlement in Tonga, which is believed to have occurred roughly 3,000 years ago. Interestingly, that estimated timeline lines up with evidence of a massive tsunami that hit New Zealand's North Island, around 1,300 miles southwest of Tonga. The researchers had a theory. Now all they had to do was run the numbers to see if it was actually possible. So they measured the boulder's size and weight, then used that data to model how big a wave would have to be to push such a massive rock that far inland. Their findings suggest the boulder may have originally sat near the edge of a cliff, but was shoved inland by a tsunami. The wave lasted about 90 seconds and reached up to 164 feet in height. That's almost as tall as Niagara Falls. Just to give you a perspective, that's significantly larger than the waves recorded during the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004 or the Tohoku tsunami in 2011. Now, here's the thing. These tsunamis were triggered by earthquakes, and waves caused by earthquakes usually top out at just a few tens of feet. So, in Makalahi's case, it probably wasn't an earthquake that did the job. Instead, it's possible the wave came from a landslide tsunami. This theory suggests that the earthquake not only generated a tsunami that flooded the island, but it probably also triggered a massive landslide. When a huge chunk of material suddenly slides into the ocean or something shifts quickly underwater, it can create a landslide-triggered tsunami, and that landslide, in turn, may have produced a second tsunami. One powerful enough to carry Makalahi and drop it where it still sits today. Now, while science may have found a likely explanation for how the rock got to such a strange location, many locals will probably continue to pass down the traditional stories tied to rocks like this one. According to Polynesian mythology, coastal boulders like Makalahi were placed by the legendary hero Maui. In some legends, Maui used a giant boulder and a magical rope made from the hair of the deity Hina to anchor the sun and slow it down. Another story is known as the Maui Throwing Stones. It refers to a group of 8 coral limestone boulders located in the village of Havelukilu on Tonga Tapu. The myth mentions that these massive stones were thrown to Havelukilu by Maui from the neighboring island of Eua. The story goes that Maui was annoyed by a rooster that woke him up every morning, so he picked up stones and hurled them at the bird. And that's how the rocks from Eua ended up in Tonga Tapu. Now here's the interesting part. The term white chicken in Tongan also means foaming waves, so some believe this story may actually be a metaphor for a tsunami. Even though these myths don't mention Makalahi directly, they show how important rocks like these are to local people. Now, we can say that this archaeological evidence is not only important for culture, but also for science. The recent study gives us some fascinating theories about how the rock ended up so high up and so far inland. But researchers still need to find what's called a landslide scar to prove their point and fully solve the Tonga cliff mystery. Follow-up research is crucial because it will help us to uncover what triggers these kinds of events and how often that might happen. And who knows? One day we might come across new cases of giant rocks moved by giant tsunamis, each one carrying its own story from the deep.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.